What's up YouTube, my name is Hegemony and this is episode 3 of Understanding High Level PvP in Path of Exile. Today I'm going to cover some of the groundwork for some basics. We're going to brush up on resources, flasks, auras, prep time, and balance. First off, you're probably going to need to scrap the way you think about builds and what you know in PvE to be good. Some of the top tier 1 PvE builds simply just don't translate well in high level PvP due to the fact that there are a lot of skills that require charge generation or leech to be really good. Low life spectral throw, crit reave, discharge, and other builds really fall behind the PvP curve. However, I find this to be a good game dynamic. Overall, I think it's really good to have a design where a lot of skills excel in PvE at the highest levels, and skills that are just unused in PvE are some of the best options in a polished PvP build. This leads us into our next discussion. In PvP, you really need to think outside of the box and focus a bit more on resource management in your build. This is where PvP builds or PvE builds will tend to fail because leech is somehow incorporated into the function of it. You really need to not rely on mana or life leech. This is due to not being able to reliably hit a target because a player is either evasive with his movements or his defenses are set up to either avoid, mitigate the hit altogether. Another common form of leech is actually having immunity against it via notable passives such as Bloodless, Mental Fortitude, or having items such as Syntrex or a corrupted chest piece that has enemies unable to leech life off of you. Now you guys are aware, as you add more support links, the cost goes up. And now it's more likely that your main attacks are going to need the Blood Magic support gem to be able to spam it. It's kind of hard to put a lot of pressure on both your mana pool and your mana regen to be able to run everything off of mana. That's why it makes CI and low life quite difficult to set up gear wise. The bottom line is you need to know your cost and focus on an infinite supply of resource to spam your attack. Don't forget that curses also cost quite a bit, and you'll need to be using them in succession because either they'll dispel it or you'll be missing them. We'll dive into more details about the setups in later videos. So people ask, are low life builds even viable? And how do aura builds hold up in high level PvP? Yes, they do work. However, you do need to choose 1 to 2 auras that you can function off of in a flight fight. The game is really balanced around against having many auras in your setup because the time it takes to arm them. If it takes very little time for your opponent to get to the corner of your map. This is why if you're fighting up against an aura build or a massively low life, setup, then it's almost always better to bum rush them, even with no auras yourself, to make a kill, because they'll most likely be unable to handle what you throw at them. At the most, I would put maybe 1 aura up myself, like Hatred, if I felt like I needed the damage, or I wasn't doing much damage during the bum rush. It's also worth mentioning that if someone is low life and below 10% HP, then a simple culling strike attached to anything will bypass their energy shield. As long as you can land the hit, it'll net you the win. Most low life users know this, and they will tweak their HP so that they're above 10% after the reservation. A good low life build will only go low life with 1 blood magic gem and 1 aura as the first thing that they cast, just to activate pain attunement. After that, 1 more aura such as hatred, discipline, or tempest shield as a second arming aura, just to get their base started, to make them able to fight at the earliest times. The new blood magic mecha PvE build doesn't really have a place in PvP, as life gain on hit is essential and it's unreliable without leech mechanics. In general, there's no real place for low life attack based builds at the moment. Most PvPers just use pain attunement, so I wouldn't build any PvP build around using blood rage, because people can use stuff like vulnerability to enhance the degen and make you harm yourself faster with your own blood rage. For most cases, blood rage is generally a bad idea, because even for CI, because it's so fast paced that spending the global cooldown can cost you your life, especially when you're trying to dodge these fast arrows or traps or just trying to get into a better position. Alright, enough about resources. Let's move on to Flasks. What you guys know about Flask and PvE are completely different on how they work in PvP. The Avenger prefix, the +3 charges upon receiving a critical strike, is usually the holy grail of Flask and high-level dueling. Flasks control the tempo of the game, much like they do in LLD. Usually the person who runs out of Flasks will surely end up in the most losses. This is why charge generation of Flask charges with the usage of Avengers mod will usually end up in superior resources. They allow you to be both extremely defensive and really aggressive. Many melee rely on the element of surprise to get in the high preparation builds, such as a trapper. So things like an adrenaline movement speed Quicksilver can allow you to chase him down or solidify a killing blow. Going up against an EA controller, it's important to be ready for those discharges of arrows that have penetrated your shield or are stuck in your arm or your head, and have those ruby flasks ready to dispel the burn or just mitigate the upfront damage. We can't forget about those bleeds from both fist daggers and bow builds. As a hard CC'er, such as like a tri-cursor with increased durations, they'll probably play a much longer game. They'll make an attempt to get you to use all your warding flasks before they attempt much aggression at all. This is a slower game tempo that usually speeds up at the last few rounds, but it's an effective one. Make sure to have a lot of game sense and patience if you want to pull off a build like that. Flask swapping is always a hard decision to make at as you start your builds. People play many matches and end up finding out what their weaknesses truly are. In the current meta, I would recommend a minimum of 3 wardings, 1 dispel, and 1 puncture removal to start a random queue. Then make the swaps after you have discovered what your opponent's main threats are. The removal of chill, freeze, are often not really wanted because most people will use dream fragments, which I feel is, a mandatory item that you need to have in your arsenal. Most freeze pulses are tied with echo, so they're just like machine gunning those things, and your dispels often get wasted. You should rely on stuff like crystal skin or alpha howl, oxium, things like that to deal with the chill or freeze. This is why another reason why burning dispels are needed is mainly due to the fact that either you go up against EA or you go up against a physical attack based character with Herald of Ash. Now Herald of Ash was added recently, and the mechanic behind it is pretty OP. Since traps have a HP of 1, all the damage gets translated into overkill damage in an ignition circle. This makes the usage of traps very tricky because Herald of Ash can easily kill you, with a crit dagger build that's just whirling bladesing through them or leap slamming through them. There's a couple of things that just make Herald of Ash damage just insane because it's all overkill damage. Offensive flasks are really a piss poor choice in my opinion for viable builds. If you have to rely on a diamond flask to make a kill, it's got 1 charge, 1 use, takes 80 to fill, it's a short duration, and it may get you 1 win, but what are you going to do for the rest of the time? Atziri flasks are borderline viable because it has 2 charges, doesn't take too long to fill, but it also provides chaos resistance, damage, and extra leech if you're weak. However, if possible, I try to avoid using them or relying on them. Maybe in a melee versus melee fight where you guys are mirror matched, it would put you over the edge or push you over the edge, and then you could stall for when you don't have the charges. That would be an option. I consider Quicksilver Warding Flask and Quicksilver Adrenaline Flask to be DPS flasks because it may not increase your tooltip, but it just simply gets you closer to your opponent and closes that gap for more DPS uptime or a kill. That's very important. As for Healing Flask, you don't really use Seething. Most people use Panicked Flask, which is instant healing on low life, and or catalyzed or sapping flasks that are on Eternals. They get that rapid healing. Very, very good for a mirror match when you're just going toe to toe. Who's got more deeps? That proper flask usage can go a long way in pushing you over the edge to win. One of the most important aspects of a good PvP build is a finisher. It's nice to deal a lot of damage with like a dual strike or something, but if your opponent can reliably get away, your build is really going to struggle racking up the wins. Consider direct damage attacks with Culling Strike for long range, or possibly using temp chains or vulnerability to increase degeneration time if you get like a good ignite or puncture on them. A good PvP build usually has a lot of regen or energy shield recovery to refill over a stall period. So if you get low, you run behind a wall, you do the dance and don't get hit by anything, and you just wait till your HP or energy shield refills and then re-engage and give it another go. Not having any regen or any source of regen or resetting the fight will often net you in a loss. For melee builds, Flicker Strike and Puncture are good options to punish those who run away. And for casters, really good usage of Smoke Mines, projectile spells make for really hasty kills. We'll discuss more of these aspects in later videos. I don't want to give you guys so much to think about in one sitting, and I don't want these videos to be so long that it breaks your attention span or cause boredom. I've been doing a lot of PvP recently on my live stream, so if you want to check it out or ask anything about HLD, feel free to catch me when I go live on Twitch TV. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and continue to enjoy the series. Feel free to hit the like and subscribe button. I'll see you guys later. Peace out.